Hello and welcome to today's InfoPeople webinar. InfoPeople is dedicated to bringing you the best in practical library training and improving information access for the public by improving the skills of library workers. InfoPeople is supported in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Services and Technology Act, administered in California by the State Librarian. Today's webinar is entitled Beyond the Rhymes, Rethinking the Who, Where, and How of Storytimes, Part 1, The People, presented by Patrick Rimmer and Heidi Dollamore. Patrick works and plays in the Contra Costa County Library as the children's librarian at the Pleasant Hill Library. When he's not singing and reading books at Storytime, he's probably singing and reading books somewhere else. Heidi is the Deputy Director of Public Services for Solano County Library and has worked as a children's librarian and engineering librarian, a circulation clerk, and a letter carrier for the U.S. Postal Service.
Okay, well,
She thinks everyone deserves a great public library and spends...
I can hear them on the phone.
and spends her time helping make that happen. I'm now happy to introduce Patrick and Heidi.
With the PowerPoint that they put together, but it's not like I can just...
Hi, Suzanne, or someone we can hear you on the phone. If you could please mute, that would be great.
Hello world, welcome to Beyond the Rhymes. We're so glad you could join us today. We're going to go beyond the nuts and bolts of Storytime delivery today with this trio of webinars. We're going to be looking at big picture concepts and strategic decision making around Storytimes. We're hoping that we're going to help you achieve bigger outcomes and improve customer service, reach more of your community by working together, children's librarians and supervisors teaming up to make a big difference.
So we've already had our brief bios.
All guests have been muted.
Oh, hi there. So I am currently, this is Heidi, I'm currently the Deputy Director for Solano County Library, but I have not left behind my passion for children's services as I have progressed into more supervisory roles.
My name is Patrick Reamer, as you heard. I'm the children's librarian at the Pleasant Hill Library in the Contra Costa County Library. Together, Heidi and I worked at the Pleasant Hill Library. Over the last 3 years, we were able to expand Storytime offerings to our community, increasing attendance 700% at our location. And we're just hoping that today and over the next couple webinars, we're going to be able to share some of our stories and some of the strategies that we found successful in our service to that community.
So this webinar is the first in a series of 3 that Patrick and I will be doing, and there will be additional 3 webinars as part of the ELF series. In this session, we are focusing on the role of staff in planning and providing Storytime. Our next webinar, it will be next Tuesday. We're going to be talking about the spaces where Storytimes happen. And our final webinar in this series of 3 will be Thursday the 20th. We're going to talk about packaging your offerings to make it simple and easy for parents. So to get started, as a supervisor, I can say that when I want to try something new or when our library is hoping to try something new, we often want to see those ideas bubble up from the staff that are providing direct service to the public. We want to see that coming up from the grassroots level. Meanwhile, when we say that to our staff, we often have the response that they want permission, they want guidance, they want direction for new initiatives. What we're going to be talking about in this series is the importance of everyone working together. This is it needs to be a team approach. And we have a shared responsibility for Storytime. We have different roles, different responsibilities, and we each have different strengths to bring to the mix. So we want the supervisors to have input in planning and strategic decisions, and we want to mentor our librarians and our paraprofessionals providing Storytime to bring them forward into making those kinds of decisions.
Exactly. And from the librarian's perspective or from the Storytime practitioner's perspective, you know, Storytime is something that we are so passionate about. It brings so much joy to our work. And so we feel a really strong sense of ownership around Storytime, a sense of responsibility in that it's sort of like our thing. But really, as Heidi said, it's a team thing. If we're really going to get these huge outcomes, it's going to involve everybody. It's going to involve much larger teams than just an individual can accomplish. When we say share the love and get other people involved, we're talking about bringing as many people into the fold, as it were, to share that joy and really get as many people engaged in early literacy services, because they just are so critical. There's also just the issue of, as a librarian, I'm so focused on delivering the story time, preparing, picking the books and learning new songs or rhymes or whatever it is, the content of story time. I get so into the weeds on that sometimes that I don't have the critical distance or the time or flexibility to step back and really look at the big picture. And so that's where that partnership between supervisor and librarian is so critical, because we're able to collaborate and basically look at the same problem from two different angles.
So one concern that someone might have is in providing guidance to a budding children's librarian or an experienced children's librarian or many of the other people in your library that provide story time services. A supervisor may not have a background in youth services, and yet you're still expected to evaluate, to plan, and to be involved in guiding the service at your library. We're not expecting everyone to know everything. I mean, having a balanced team does not mean that everyone is an expert in everything. It means that there's a balance of expertise, and that you look to each other to share and build on your strengths. So it's perfectly reasonable for a supervisor to look to their children's services staff for subject expertise. These are your experts in early literacy concepts, in childhood development, in that particular segment of your service population. But that doesn't mean that you as a supervisor don't also have a role to play. Your role is a different role. You should feel some ownership of big picture planning, evaluation, and this is a way that it's important to clarify your roles. When you clarify those roles, when you define your role, when you define the children's librarian's role or your youth services staff, and I just want to say, we often use librarian as a shorthand, but there are so many people, so many talented and qualified paraprofessionals who are also providing this kind of service. But again, when you clarify the role of the supervisor in the storytime picture, you actually give your youth services staff a great deal of freedom. You can define the areas in which they get to make decisions, and then you define the areas in which they should come to you for support.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you need to gain some credibility here, so you need to do some homework. It's really important to get familiar with the foundational concepts so that when you're talking about early literacy, you have some shared vocabulary. You're talking about it from a place of shared understanding. And this also will build your credibility when you make a suggestion to try something new, if you can ground it in some of those foundational concepts. I think what Patrick and I are saying is that Storytime deserves everyone's attention. It is such an important piece of what we do in libraries, and so it's important to devote some of your time to it. Spend some time talking with your children's services staff. Spend some time observing Storytime. Show them, walk the walk. Show them that you are investing time. You think that this is important, and you're willing to make it a priority, not just for your staff, but for your time as well.
Yeah, and I know just in my experience too, having Heidi so invested in it gives me additional confidence, and as she said, additional freedom that she's defined this as such an important thing. It gives me the go-ahead to really invest myself even more in this critical service.
So as a part of this series, we want to make this really practical for you. And so we've given you can maybe think about it as homework, or you can think about it as conversation prompts or action steps. But we want to give you some specific things that you could actually go and do, if not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. But these are simple, they're discrete tasks. Things that can get you on your way towards making some changes, to really growing your Storytime program. So our suggestion for supervisors is do some homework. Like we said, we want you to come up with a shared language and a common understanding of the issues. If your youth services staff start talking about the 5 Storytime practices, or they start talking about print motivation, we want you to have an understanding of the basics of these concepts. You don't need to be familiar with them on the same level as your youth services staff, but we want you to have heard these concepts before so that you understand where they're coming from.
Those conversations are just going to be so much more meaningful, right, when you have the shared vocabulary. So for the librarian takeaway, we recommend that that you invite your supervisor to observe your story time. If they're not already out watching you do your thing, then give them an explicit invitation to come and watch you, because that'll be the trigger for those conversations that will really be fruitful in making maybe some exciting new changes.
And this is really one of the best ways to get people excited about story time, because the energy in story time is just so contagious. I think you would be hard-pressed to find someone who would watch story time and not get drawn into it, not see the joy in the participants' faces, not see the really exciting learning that's happening there. They're going to want to get involved when they see how much fun it is.
Absolutely.
So we've also built in a little bit of question and answer time for you. We want to make sure that we are addressing some of the most pressing questions and issues that you have. I know that you all have a great deal of expertise, so I'm sure that you have a lot to offer each other in the chat window as well. But do you have any questions for us as we get started? Things that you're hoping to hear, things that you'd like us to address, or things you'd like to learn?
Cool. We got some chats going on in here. Let's see what comes through.
Well, one thing that might be interesting to pose a question to you, can we have you have a raise your hand feature? And I'm curious to know how many supervisors are participating today. If you look in your chat window, just above that, you should have a raise your hand feature. Can you go ahead and acknowledge if you are not necessarily a direct provider of story times, but if you supervise someone who provides story times? Oh, I see a question here. Someone is talking about, we have a great demand for story time. Tickets and signups, that's something we're actually going to address in our third part of the series, the package. Here's another question. What resources do you recommend to a new children's librarian?
Yeah, I think that for me, the best resources were always the people that were around me, and that's suitable for the first of our 3 webinars, which is obviously focusing on staff. When I first got started, I had absolutely no experience doing story time. Now I feel like I'm born to do it, but it was really just exposing myself to other people doing story time, stealing the best stuff, and asking questions and watching it. Watching different styles from different storytellers. And then, of course, doing my homework, which is, reading up on the early literacy research and, going back and looking at, readings that were, assigned to me in library school. But really, it's the people. I really do feel it's the people. We're going to talk more about how those teams create a more organic community of learning. But the other thing, too, is I just feel like every time I do a story time, I'm pushing myself to try one new different thing. And sometimes it flops, and sometimes it's amazing. And being able to learn from that and really just be attuned to the people who are showing up for your story times. And talking to families after story time, what did you like, and seeing the kinds of books that check out, and just kind of trying to keep that really strong pulse on the people who are coming. So it's not just learning from the people who are on your staff and on your team, or maybe doing story times at other locations or across the country, but those people who are coming to your story times and giving you that feedback that's either explicit and verbal, or maybe just a little bit more subtle.
There's one other question that I wanted to call out as well. Someone mentioned that they're brand new at their library, and they currently don't have any kids coming to story time. This we are going to talk a little bit more about in our second webinar about places. And I just want to give you a little sneak preview. Sometimes the best place for your story time may not be in the library. There are definitely kids in your community, and if they're not coming to you, you need to go out and find them where they're at. So, with that said, let's move on to talking about flexible teams. We want to make a really strong case that early literacy should be a priority, not just in our libraries, but in every library. But we also want to acknowledge that we have limited resources, limited staffing. And so this can't be a question of finding more in order to do more. We really have to start talking about how we can expand our capacity with the resources that we currently have.
Right, you're not just going to get new staff people falling out of the heavens in parachutes that are going to help you do a bazillion story times. So, so we're talking about looking at your staffing configuration, right?
Right. So as a supervisor, I want to encourage you to think about the different roles that your staff currently play. How many people do you have working in your branch? This is me with my supervisor hat on. You know, of course you need to look at your union work rules, you need to look at your job descriptions, and you want to work within the boundaries of those descriptions and those rules. But at the same time, there may be some flexibility there, or there may be new opportunities there that you're not yet taking advantage of. It's so critical to involve paraprofessionals in story times, both in terms of being able to expand your capacity, but also in terms of providing a professional development opportunity to grow them perhaps into a children's librarian, perhaps into a supervisor with a background in youth services. You know, I think that we, as so many of us as librarians, we may start out as generalists, or even if we have a specialty, whether it's adult services or teen services or youth services, we're still expected to help everyone who comes through our door. And so each of us can serve many ages. You may have a staff member that is aces at leading an adult book club, but that doesn't mean that that person can't also be great at doing story time.
In fact, I think there's actually a lot of similarities there, probably.
And you know, I think I always say that story time is great practice for public speaking. I mean, if you can keep rapt attention of a room full of 2- and 3-year-olds, you'll have no trouble speaking to city council. But one example from the library where Patrick and I work together, we started with 3 paraprofessionals who were assigned to specific age level services. So we had an adult services paraprofessional, a teen services paraprofessional, and a children's services professional. But over time, we realized that those job descriptions weren't really serving us. These are potentially our most flexible positions, and you know, the person who is great at organizing your technology tutoring program for adults can also be great at leading Storytime. Now all 3 of those paraprofessionals lead Storytime, and we've actually let go of the age level descriptions altogether. We were moving more in a direction of project-based roles, which also contributes to a real team approach, rather than saying, you know, okay, you're the adult services staff member, you're responsible for that area. We want to start moving towards, this is our team, this is our library, we're all responsible for these programs, and here's how we're going to share that responsibility.
Right. And once you've been able to build that capacity, it allows you to do some really amazing things, like uninterrupted year-round story times. You know, we need to be flexible in our scheduling. You know, if you have, you know, one youth services librarian on the team, you can't depend on that person being in the building, healthy, ready to do a story time every week throughout the year. There's going to be school visits, there's going to be program planning, there's going to be all these other demands on that person's time. And so that's why having that larger team means you can have flexible scheduling. You can set up story times that are convenient for your community and not simply what matches one person's staff schedule. It relieves tremendous pressure on me as a children's librarian because I'm not planning every single event. There's obviously backup when I'm sick. I can stay home and take care of my health and not just stress about whether or not there's going to be a story time that's canceled. You know, at Pleasant Hill, we haven't had to cancel a story time in 3 years, and that's in the last 2 years, that's 5 story times a week. So that's a ton of story times that we've been able to offer consistently. And, you know, parents have sort of stopped asking, when are you going to take a break? They just sort of expect that it's going to be there, and that is an amazing service for them. We hear that a lot from our Storytime visitors.
And this really plays into the concept of evaluating customer service in terms of story times, how, in addition to the quality of the engagement, the rhymes, the songs, the participation, there are lots of different aspects of customer service when you're looking at story times. So continuity, scheduling, these are all factors that are important to consider. And we are going to spend a little bit more time looking at those concepts in depth in the third webinar in this series. Now, some of you might be thinking that we are asking you to devote a lot of resources to Storytime, and the answer to that is yes, absolutely. we are asking you to devote a lot of resources to Storytime. But I want to remind you that not only is that okay, it's more than okay. It's called for. It's absolutely appropriate. You may have seen the recent Pew report, Libraries in the Digital Age, and there was overwhelming support for libraries providing early literacy services. Not just support, but there's an expectation that we fill this role. So you have not just permission, but you have a mandate from your public to devote a lot of resources to Storytime. So it's important to think about, when you're looking at your staffing, if you are seeing that 50% of your programs and 50% of your participation in programs comes from children's services, services to families, services to families with young children, then does your staffing model match that, or are you expecting one person to reach out to this huge community need, this huge demand for service, while others are trying to come up with lots of programs for other aspects of your community?
I want to talk about a few other advantages to having big teams. For me, having that culture of fun where so many people are thinking and playing with Storytime, it really does so much for a positive and optimistic and sunny culture at our location. Everyone's contributing to the success, so everybody gets to share in the success. Again, we have pretty big numbers at our story times, and so the more people that are tied to that tremendous engagement, the more satisfying it is for everybody. They feel that sense of accomplishment. And when I say everybody, I don't just mean the Storytime practitioners, the paraprofessionals and the librarians who are doing Storytime. I'm actually also talking about folks like shelvers and volunteers who set up the chairs and keep the area tidy. They've got, make sure that the picture books are looking great so that after Storytime it's a fun browsing experience for all the kids and families there. I'm talking about the circ staff that are on the desk. There's somebody still at the desk while Storytimes are going on, and they're promoting your Storytimes. They're helping with all the rush of checkouts that happen before and after Storytime. That's absolutely huge. I mean, that is part of Storytime, even though it doesn't take place, necessarily in the middle of your Storytime. It's part of the larger package. We're talking about, of course, the paraprofessionals who are either leading Storytimes themselves or they're covering other services while someone else is doing Storytime. And again, managers. The manager really, or the supervisor, has a tremendous role to play in making Storytimes a success. And I know one thing that Heidi would often do is she'd be there to greet families as they arrive and chat them up and talk about, what their needs were and, how their kids were enjoying Storytime and, kind of trying to tease out maybe some issues, some little hitches.
This is a great instant focus group for you if you're thinking about, I need to know what my community is thinking about, what they're interested in. You have a captive audience there who are welcome to answer your questions and talk with you about Storytime. I mean, they're bringing their children to the library because they want to get them off on the right foot for success in life. They are really invested in this program. They'll be happy to talk to you.
And one of the other big advantages, I'm just going to throw out a rhetorical question here, is, are you short on time at your library? If you are, you might see increased efficiency if you've got lots of big team, right? You've got, you're trying to find books for next week's story time, you're trying to dream up a new song or rhyme or whatever you're trying to do to keep your story time fresh. Having a team where everybody's doing that and everybody's looking for the next thing to fold into story time, the next kind of hit book that's really going to captivate kids, having a team that's all seeking that stuff means that you've got sort of a larger pool of material to work from. And it means you can sift out the best stuff and save yourself some time when you're preparing for your own story time.
So we want to pose a challenge to you. We want to encourage you to rethink the roles that you and your coworkers are playing with regards to story time. As a supervisor, it's important to keep story time in mind when you're making hiring decisions. You know, are you thinking about this person as fulfilling one specific role, or are you thinking about them as possibly being a backup for story time if your librarian calls in sick? Are you thinking about, you know, maybe this person could help us expand our story time rotation? We could add an additional story time if we train this person up and throw them into the mix. Again, I want to encourage you to think about project-based roles rather than narrowly defined roles for a specific target age. I think that we're seeing so many of our successful programs have a real multi-generational appeal. And when we think about Storytime, I mean, is that a service that's exclusively for children, or is it a service that's for parents? In many cases, it may be a service that's for grandparents. So there's a lot of intermingling of those kinds of age-level responsibilities with regards to story time. You know, here at Solano County and as well at Pleasant Hill, when I was working with Patrick, we have many of our teen librarians are available for backup if there's a need. I think that it's great to be able to give someone an opportunity to try something different, to build a new skill, to expand their relationship with the community. You know, someone may have a younger child, but they may also have an older child. That the teen librarian may already have a connection with that family, with that parent, and this is yet another way for them to deepen that connection with the public. Now, this, you know, you may not be in a position where you're ready to implement this, but this is a great place to be an advocate for change in your library. You can discuss it with your supervisor. You can ask them or encourage them to discuss it with their supervisor. We're not suggesting that you sort of do an end run around around the folks in charge and just start doing things however you please. We want you to really work within the system for sustained changes to help us evolve how we are approaching these services. So we have come again to our homework assignments, our takeaways. And Patrick mentioned that story time is something that everyone participates in. So it's really important to help everyone understand what the goals are for Storytime, how it relates to the work that the library is doing, how it relates to the goals that you have for your work team, and where their role fits into the mix.
Great. So for librarians, we're talking about acknowledging, you've got a staff meeting, you're discussing the different roles that people are playing in Storytime. It's great for the folks who are leading up Storytime to acknowledge all the great things that other staff members are doing to make it a success. So I talked about the way that shelvers and volunteers or circulation staff are really contributing to sort of an environment where people feel welcome and excited about coming to Storytime. Go ahead and call that out. It's a great way to bring everybody together around that success and feel that shared sense of success. Okay.
So we are back at our Q&A section again. So we'd like to check in with you and see if you have any questions about, again, about what we've just discussed or other ideas that you'd like to explore.
Well, and this is Suzanne, and I was going to chime in because you guys have been generating lots of questions, and I've been trying to track them for you. So I thought what I might do is to read back some of them, because some great questions are being raised from your presentation.
Great.
So
fire away, Suzanne.
Okay, so one of them that that came up was sort of the changing Storytime philosophies, and maybe this is something you're going to discuss in other webinars, but the stage on the stage versus the guide on the side kind of concept was one of the questions, and what sort of thoughts you have about that changing Storytime approach.
Yeah, you're talking about basically interactivity and how we engage audiences
exactly.
through Storytime? Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's actually while we were putting this webinar together, Heidi and I were sort of debating over what's the term that you use for somebody who's delivering a story time or leading a story time. Delivering is really not the right word, right? Because that sounds like you're giving somebody a package and happy birthday, you know, there you go. That's absolutely not really the way story times work. It's totally a shared experience where there's sort of a response. I'd like to think that if I and all of my team were gone one day, that all the families that came to Storytime would just spontaneously have their own Storytime, right? We've done so many, we've done the welcoming song. There's stories and things that we've read over and over because repetition is so important. I'd love to think that parents would just leap in and take on Storytime and lead it themselves. I was floating that actually with some parents who had stayed, were staying and playing after story time, and I was like, would you guys do that? Would you pull out a book from the shelf and just start doing a story time, or start singing one of the songs? And they were like, I might, and I'm like, well, now I'm counting on you. And I think that's a sort of a great seed to plant, is that because ultimately, right, we get these kids and these families for 20 minutes a day, 20 minutes at a story time. But the whole concept, right, is that they're taking all of this stuff home and they're doing it in the car, they're doing it in the supermarket, they're doing it in the bathtub, they're doing it before bedtime. Story time is hopefully happening all the time, everywhere, right? That's the true measure of story time success, is not just if they're showing up and doing these things in your library, but if they're taking them home. So, as far as sort of abolishing the concept of, the sage on the stage, there's certainly a theatrical component to Storytime, no doubt about that. We want to make it engaging for kids and their caregivers, but the bottom line is that they're doing it, right? They're the ones singing along and clapping along and moving and starting to identify letters and new words, and they're taking it home with them. I actually do often hear about families where we've been bringing our kid to Storytime for 6 months, and we thought they were just sitting there and not really getting much out of it, and then all of a sudden some switch went on, the light bulb goes on, and they basically deliver an entire Storytime, and they pretend that they're you. I think that I'm sure there's folks out there who've heard this many times from folks coming to their Storytimes, is that at a certain point when the kid's ready, it's going to turn on and they're going to just parrot it all back. They've been sponging it up this whole time. And that's really, again, another sign that it's not about us. It's really about the family.
Well, and on the flip side of that then, though, there's also people who are talking about how do you deal with the distracted adult or the adults or the caregivers who are there that really aren't engaged with the story time and are talking amongst themselves. And
yeah. For me, that's a sign that there are things that I can do to sort of tweak story time to bring the parents back in. Because, again, it's not just for the kids right there and then, right? If the parents aren't getting it and they're not soaking it up too, who's going to be facilitating early literacy practice in the home or in the car or at the supermarket, like I said? So sometimes that's throwing in some higher level humor to tease out some jokes for the parents. Or what I'll do is I'll oftentimes take a rock and roll song or a song that the parents are going to get and enjoy, or change the words to a Bob Dylan tune or something like that. That will get their attention. And then just hearing from them. I feel like what Heidi was saying about engaging them in conversation before and after, you're building a relationship with them. And if they're more concerned about a text message that they're getting on their phone, it's clear that we haven't been able to develop a deeper rapport with that person, right? The relationship they're caring about right now is whatever's on their phone. Maybe if we spend a little more time attending to their interests and their story and their family before and after story time, we'll be able to bridge that through story time.
And it's important to remind that we have to remember to create a place where individuals, whether they're parents or grandparents or children or caregivers, where they can participate in story time on their own terms. So, we may have a parent who is brand new to story time who doesn't yet have a feel for what the expectations are, or there may be something going on in their life. They may not be able to provide their full attention that day, but we still want to give them that exposure. And so is there a way that you can create a space for them to participate in a way that's comfortable for them? Maybe that doesn't mean sitting front and center. Maybe that means creating a space where they can, sort of hang on to the edge, and if they need to step away for a little bit, step away, then be able to come back and participate without feeling like they're disrupting story time, without feeling like they're going to be called attention to for getting up and leaving and having to come back. I did also want to address one other question that came through the chat. Could you explain story times as project-focused rather than for specific ages? I think we've got two questions going on there. We're actually going to be talking about age-level services, focusing story times on various different ages in, is that the second or is that the third webinar? I think that's the third webinar.
The third one, we'll talk about mixed age.
But in terms of thinking about story time as a project, this is where I want you to step out of your sort of practitioner role and step into your planner and your evaluator role. What we're talking about with Storytime as a project, instead of assigning that as a task for one person or saying that, these are the people on our team responsible for Storytime, we want to think about Storytime as a priority for our branch, for our system, for our work group, and then how do we meet the needs of that program? So that might mean that one day one member of your staff is addressing that service or is filling that role of Storytime provider, but on the next day it might be a different person. So it's not that you have designated one person to be responsible for it. You're figuring out what are the ways that everyone can be responsible for it. So, if you have, rather than thinking about someone as being an adult services library assistant or library associate, you might think about them as having responsibility or sharing responsibility for certain projects in your library. So it may be that, Patrick is responsible for Storytime, but he also is the backup for the adult book group if that person is out sick.
And I think the closer that you look at any program, right, those age barriers break down pretty quickly. I mean, again, we talked about it a lot with Storytime here, where, you have a grandparent who's there, or you have a parent who's there. It's, Storytime is also a program for adults, just like say a program you have that's an information session on Common Core, right? Is that for kids or is that for adults? Well, as the youth services librarian, I was concerned and connected to that issue, so I'm the one who organized that. But it was also a program for adults. It was, the folks who came for that were the adults. So I think there's a lot of situations like that where you've got programming, you're designing services to your community, and it's, the closer you take a look at it, the less it makes sense to really rigidly break down who's going to be doing the work behind it.
Okay, so now we are going to move on to our next segment,
which is growing confident storytellers. I'd like to start by just saying that I think everybody has tremendous potential to contribute to Storytime at the library. I feel like we ask all of our parents and caregivers who come to Storytime to be engaged, and we invest a confidence in them that they can be their child's first best teacher, right? That is our message to them. Likewise, we also have a responsibility to sort of model that and be flexible about how we can contribute to early literacy just at our location for our community. But we're going to need to sort of grow that confidence in order for that to succeed.
So what we're really talking about is investing in your staff. When you identify a new staff member who could potentially lead Storytime, we need to invest in them to provide them with the support, the encouragement, and the training in order to grow and develop those skills. And I want to remind you that oftentimes what might at first blush look like a reluctance to take on a new responsibility might in fact be a lack of confidence because there's not a firm basis in training. They don't know how to do this new thing, or they don't feel prepared to do this, take on this new task. So we really need to mentor our staff. We need to help develop those skills so that they feel ready to embrace these new kinds of opportunities. And of course, training isn't just for folks who are new to Storytime, for new staff or new hires, people who are new to taking on this role. We also want to invest in our seasoned professionals. We're all constantly learning and growing. People keep changing, our communities keep changing, and so there will always be something new to learn. You know, you may have someone who has been doing Storytime for years and has a level of expertise that is enviable by many people, but at the same time, look at your community. Maybe you had a predominantly Spanish-speaking community 5 or 10 years ago, but there's been an influx of Southeast Asian immigrants, and now all of a sudden the dynamic has changed. There's a training opportunity there. There's the opportunity to develop new skills, even in the most seasoned and experienced professionals.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to just share some examples from Pleasant Hill. Here's a picture of Jeff, one of our paraprofessionals, who, you know, like myself, did not have any Storytime experience, very, very minimal experience working directly with youth. I came from another branch in Contra Costa County where I was an adult services library assistant. I was running the book club, and I was doing, you know, outreach to seniors and things like that. When I showed up at Pleasant Hill and was trying to help out with some vacancies that we had there, you know, Heidi came to me and said, I would like you to do Storytime. And I was, you know, as you can imagine, I'm sure many of you have a similar story, it's a little nerve-wracking. Like, hey, I want you to get up in front of, you know, 50 or 100 kids and do some song and dance. I mean, I'm a charismatic guy, and I was like, okay, yeah, sure, okay, I can do this.
Actually, I believe your answer was, how about 3 months from now?
Yeah, give me a little time, Heidi. Gosh. But that, to me, that was a vote. That was a vote of confidence. She knew that I could do it, even though I wasn't sure if I could do it. You know, I said, give me a few months, and she bumped up that timeline in a way that didn't give me the wiggle room to really get, you know, blow it out of proportion. It was like, okay, no, we need to set up a timeline where you can observe other people's story times. So we set up some times where I could watch some really seasoned professionals do their thing. You know, build up my own repertoire a little bit, learning some songs and all of that, sending me to some other training. And, you know, here I am 3 years later. We have some really, really epic story times, and I just feel like I couldn't imagine doing something that didn't involve story time. I just feel like it's a genuine passion for me. So I just think that's sort of, and Jeff and another paraprofessional at our library, same thing, right? These people come to us, and we know that they've got a diverse skill set. We know that they can do a lot of things, and they've got great customer service skills, great with people, but they may not know that they can really do an excellent story time, and no one will ever know unless we give them that vote of confidence and give them the tools and support to really explore that. So anyway, I guess my message there is that, again, everybody has the potential to contribute to early literacy, and we really do need to invest in all of these folks. I also think that having that confidence also means giving our trainees or even our professionals that room to experiment and to try new things and different things and to fail at it sometimes. But basically what we're doing is initiating staff into a community of practice where you have a tight team, they're all doing the same thing, and they're learning in a very, very organic way.
And I would just really want to underscore what Patrick said there about having permission to fail. I mean, whether that's, you know, you try something new in your story time and wow, that story really flopped, or that wasn't a good fit for the people who showed up today. But as a supervisor, I recognize that there is an arc to learning, and that it's when someone is mastering a new concept, mastering a new skill, they're not going to overnight turn into an expert. I want to see progression over time. You know, if you see failure after failure after failure over a period of 6 months to a year, that's a cause for a low conversation. But I actually think that some of our greatest leaps forward are achieved through the times in which something didn't happen or didn't work out the way that we had planned or hoped or expected.
Oh yeah, that's the best. That's the best. Yeah, it's funny because we use learning experience as like, you know, a euphemism for failure, but the reverse is true. You know, it's if you're just success all the time, you're probably not stretching yourself enough, right?
So I want to get back to this concept of mentoring and goal setting, which Patrick mentioned. This is a place where supervisors can get involved, and I'm not putting out a call for people to micromanage their story times. I'm asking you to pay attention and set clear expectations. Again, we talked a little bit earlier about defining roles. Clarify those areas where your children's services staff have freedom to make decisions. Let them know where you're handing things over to them, they are able to make choices, to explore their own ideas, to experiment, but also define those areas where you want to be involved in decision making. You know, are there things that you want them to consult with you and discuss before they make a decision? Are there things where you just want them to give you a heads up so that you're aware of the decision that they've made? Or are there areas where you don't need to be involved? They can make a decision without even consulting you in the process. If you're able to define those areas clearly, everyone will be much more comfortable in their role. And Patrick mentioned, too, the sense of ownership over story time. We don't want to create a feeling of territorialism where the supervisor is trying to encroach on the librarian or the youth services staff's responsibilities. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make a successful partnership and facilitate cooperation. And in order for that to happen, I need to know what to expect of you, and you need to know what to expect of me.
And again, just, you know, when I receive direction from my supervisor, in this case, Heidi, you know, it says, maybe you should try this, or, you know, I don't know how well that worked. What do you think we should try differently? I mean, that just says to me that she cares, and that, you know, I get the sense that she's validating everything that I do, even the stuff that may not be going perfectly. It's like, okay, we're working on this piece. The fact that you call it out means that it matters.
Absolutely. And there are lots of different ways that this could play out. For example, thinking about time that you spend preparing for story time, how much time is appropriate? Is that a decision that the supervisor should be involved in? I think so. You know, we have different expectations for a beginner versus an experienced staff member. If this is your first story time ever, I think it's appropriate to spend a little bit more on prep time. But over time, I would expect to see that the amount of prep time needed evolve. And we don't want to create a situation where you become, you as a supervisor become dissatisfied with what you're seeing because you expect your staff to read your mind. If you communicate those expectations, you give your staff the opportunity to meet those expectations. And frankly, I think when you communicate expectations clearly, people want to rise to the occasion. They'll often go out and try to exceed those expectations.
Absolutely.
So we want supervisors and youth services staff to work together to set goals. And then as a supervisor, your role is to help your staff reach those goals, provide them with the support and training that they provide them with the time within your schedule in order to reach those goals. And when you have a clear understanding of what those goals are, when you're having regular conversations with your staff about how things are going, then you are able to provide that critical feedback to help them identify, okay, if this piece isn't working, maybe this is the piece, maybe we can provide you with this type of training to support your development in that area.
Right. So we mentioned the term community of practice before, and again, this is really sort of the strongest model that I can think of, or that I can frame it as, that's going to help us all develop together. Again, the idea is that we're all doing the same thing. So if we're able to share our learning and be invested in each other's learning, we're going to get the absolute best outcome. So that's not just sharing the content, what books you're using or the tricks that you have for, for how you do a song or a dance or whatever. It's sharing those disasters and how you responded to them. A kid walks away with your monkey puppet right when you're about to do a bounce. What did you do? Well, I turned it into a game and we tried to hunt for the monkey, or we did a banana rhyme to try to see if you pop up again. Whatever it is that you do, talk about those moments of sort of strain or struggle in a story time, and try to brainstorm new solutions. That's where the community of practice can really be tapped to come up with whole new approaches to those challenges that we all face in story time. And these are going to be different, right? No matter where you are, you're going to have your own different problems. But if you've got a team on site who can think about them together, the more brains that are working on the problem, the more eyes that are looking at the problem, the better those solutions will be. And we're talking about creating sort of this feedback loop, right, where success builds on success, and we're sort of using natural selection to kind of effectively weed out sort of ongoing problems where we can build really, really stable, successful, exciting story times to build early literacy in our community.
And I just want to underscore the importance of utilizing peers as mentors. This really relieves the pressure for supervisors who don't have a background in children's services. This is your out where you don't have to have all of the answers. You want to create an environment where staff can learn from each other. They can help each other figure things out. This is a fantastic professional development opportunity for staff. If you have a situation where you have a youth services librarian and paraprofessionals, this is an opportunity to develop skills in that librarian as they're growing in their career. They get to take on responsibility for mentoring, for shadowing, for supporting, and providing guidance and training to that paraprofessional. And providing someone with the opportunity to be a mentor really helps to motivate them to develop their expertise so that they can then be a resource for others.
Did I mention it's just incredibly fun? It's like, working with people closely and, watching, folks like Jeff and other paraprofessionals kind of take the journey that I took in sort of in their own way. They've found how to make story time a total success in their own way with their own style. It's a beautiful thing, and it's just such a joy to be able to do that together,
And absolutely, even as a supervisor, it's so wonderful to see someone develop and know that piece of your branch or your library plan, that it's so solid that you can entrust responsibility for that to that individual. That gives me the time to pay attention to all the other things that I need to look after as well. All right, so we are back to our takeaways. So on the topic of peer mentoring, there's a fantastic article that appeared in public libraries a few months ago, and it is that we've provided you with a link in the handout. I encourage everyone to read this, both whether you are doing storytime yourself or whether you are supervising someone who provides storytime, or whether you have a colleague that you would like to support in doing storytime. Read this article, and it has a fabulous prompts for observations of storytimes. It asks you things like, what level of engagement do you see in the parents, or how were early literacy concepts conveyed in the storytime? These are all the things that if you are in the midst of providing storytime, it's hard to keep track of. You're navigating your felt board or your puppets or your books, and you're thinking about, okay, who's crying and who's getting up and who's moving around. And so it's so fantastic to have another set of eyes who can provide you with that feedback. I remember when Patrick was first started trying to play the guitar in story time. This is an interesting little experiment, it was for me super fascinating to watch someone who had reached a level of mastery with story time, and then he said, okay, I'm going to try something that I'm really uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting to see the progression over a period of time, where I think the first time you brought your guitar in, you're like, okay, I'm just going to do story time the way that I always do, but sing too and play the guitar too. And so I watched that first story time, and I thought, okay, let's have a little conversation about how this changes the dynamic.
Yeah.
So we talked about how the audience responded to the guitar, how they responded to the difference in pacing when you have a guitar versus when you're just singing something, how they, how you can use it as to reinforce the rhythm of story time, how you can do certain things with a guitar that you can't do without, but when you have a guitar, there may be other things that don't work as well.
Absolutely.
So,
being prepared to sort of let this sort of magical thing that you've created fall all apart and try to build it together again, and just knowing that you have other people at your back who are going to help you build it, build it in a really stable way, and who can give you that objective sort of opinion. It's building a real relationship. It's going deeper with the people that you work with, where you can talk about something that's as honestly emotional as story time, being able to get that feedback and just make something really, really special together.
And the other great thing about this peer observation is if you yourself are doing story time, this is an opportunity for you to steal everyone's best stuff.
That is true. So true. Okay, so our takeaway for librarians: share the same article with your peers at Youth Services. This is a really, really great conversation piece for peers at the Youth Services level to talk about and apply. Again, it doesn't just apply to story times. It's like we're talking about across the board the things that we do in libraries can benefit from peer mentoring, but especially story time.
Okay, so I can see that you have really run away with the chat window over there. But we've got one question I do want to call out. What if you are at a small library that does not have the resources for more than one children's librarian or paraprofessional?
That's a great question. I think there's probably a variety of solutions, but one of them is if you don't have the flexibility in staffing at one location, maybe it's time to look at the flexibility in staffing across multiple locations regionally. Do you want to speak to that at all, Heidi?
Oh, absolutely. When we think about our responsibility to our service population, just as sometimes we wear our hat for our local branch or our local library, and then sometimes we wear our hat for our system. Sometimes we wear our hat at the state level, and sometimes we get big and aspirational, and we think about the consequence of libraries to humanity and democracy.
Yeah.
But think about your flexible team may extend beyond just your specific site. Is there someone that you can call on to help out, to put that person into the mix, whether that's story times in your library, whether that's outreach, and then be prepared in turn to be able to offer them that kind of assistance and support as well. You can also think about, this is again going back to this taking a team concept, a team approach to story times. If you are the only one in your building who is able to provide story time, how can you garner support among the people who are there? How can you make sure that you're able to devote time to that everyone understands what a priority that service is? And what are the ways in which they can support you? We mentioned that circulation staff have a big role to play in supporting story times through getting the word out, through helping people access those materials so that they can take them home with them. Your shelvers can play a role in helping to set up and put everything back in place after the tornado of story time is over.
Yeah. Suzanne, are you still there? Did you want to call out any other questions
Well,
that you
I'm
saw?
still here, but I know we're down to the last 2 minutes of this webinar, but the great thing is you've got a really engaged group of people sharing resources among themselves. You've spurred a lot of really good thinking on a lot of topics, and thank goodness we have you for 2 more webinars because we can just
Yeah.
we can continue these conversations. So I think we should go from here, but reassure people that we'll be reviewing all the chat ourselves, and as we go forward in the subsequent webinars, we'll try to touch on everything that folks have raised if we didn't get to it
we'll definitely
today.
have lots of opportunities to fold back in some of the challenges and questions that I think that have been raised. I am really impressed at all the ideas that are scrolling through here and links and incredible engagement. So thank you all for just being so into it. We're really, really excited that you guys all came out for the first of our 3 webinars here.
Absolutely. It's an army of Storytime librarians, and we are going to go out and reach as many people as we can. Please do join us for the next 2 webinars. We've got one coming up next Tuesday. We'll be talking about places where Storytimes happen. Then the following week, we're back to Thursday. We're going to be talking about the customer service package. And our email addresses are here on the screen, and they're on the handout as well. So please feel free to contact us with questions.
And with the takeaways, too, we've got those on the handout as well. So if you want to take action right away and go back to your staff and start talking about some of these concepts that we've raised today, do double check your handout and look at those takeaways.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.